I'm the composer Andrew Lloyd Fry, and today I'm going to be doing an analysis of the album Love Supreme by John Coltrane. This is one of the most popular jazz albums of all time, and I think there's a lot of reasons why it's so great. But for me personally, a lot of what I really appreciate about this album is it is a piece of music that has this arc from beginning to end. So instead of just song, 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 and you just, these are the tunes you played, it's very composed and very thought through and even connected. Just it's across the whole album, which is less common for jazz. And I just really like that about this album. So Alice Coltrane, his wife, said that he was kind of locked away in his room or music room or something for like 2 weeks, kind of working everything out, and I think he came down and it was like, for the first time I've got everything ready. So I think there was just a lot of forethought into this music, and it just wasn't like going in and just like recording tunes, Okay, so it starts with a kind of like rubato introduction, part one. There's 4 parts, and he had been doing more and more of the like rubato feel. I think the first example is Alabama on what is that, live at Birdland, and then Crescent, the album he recorded right before this, was like almost everything. Like the introduction to every song was rubato. So he was really like getting into that feel a lot, which is pretty unique for jazz. I'm not thinking of that many examples prior to Coltrane really using rubato. And it comes in on this, you could call it an E sus2. That's the chord that I see used for this. I don't really care for that distinction. I think anyways, that is what I've seen it called. But what that means is an E with no third. So sus2 is kind of saying no third, and you have the second instead, and then you still have the fifth in there. So that's E, F sharp, and B. So this chord could be rearranged to F sharp, B, E, which is a stack of fourths, so chordal. So obviously that's really important to his music, those, and like what McCoy was playing, all those chordal harmonies. So comes in rubato. I believe there's like a gong that opens it. So it just right from the beginning, rubato, gong, and then what Coltrane plays is just up and down that chord. Something like that. That's not exactly it, but it really has this feel of like I have an announcement to make. For some reason, this thing I love the way that opens. So he just kind of moves around that for a while, and then that kind of settles down, and then we kind of like get into like the actual piece. So we're shifting to F minor after that. And the rhythm section is kind of taking us through that transition, and then the bass comes in on this. So obviously this is a really important theme for this piece, and I love that the bass is preparing us for what comes later in the piece. So we'll get into that in a minute, but I'll call this the Love Supreme theme, and that comes back. Okay, so then the rhythm section kind of sets the mood, gets in gear, and the melody here so we'll just stop and look at that. So we have this CGF, and then it's that same thing taking up a fourth. And then then he does it again, but it's slightly embellished. So this kind of creates this sense of like conversation between this and then response. Also, interestingly, just like taking it up a fourth, so you would expect an octave or a fifth would be the more normal, like that would be more typical, taking up a fourth, so that fourth just comes up a lot, and just in the way the chords are played, in melodic material. So that's just one more example of that. Now the second time he repeats that theme, it goes through rhythmic variation. So it's like these bones are there, but it's rhythmically embellished and different. Okay, so harmonically for this whole piece, it's F minor. That's, if you listen to Coltrane and McCoy, what they play, I mean, it's kind of all over the place. But as far as like analyzing it, it's F minor. And McCoy was really good at playing modal and embellishing the stagnant chords. So, I mean, it's hard to say it's one chord because he's moving it around so much, but that's kind of like home base, and then, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty free. So he did a lot of stuff, but I think for analyzing's sake, it's like F minor the whole time. So Coltrane goes through a solo. He's the only one that solos on this first piece. And interestingly, when he's starting to like kind of bring down his solo, he's kind of like starting to kind of like come down and like conclude his solo, he keeps hitting that F note. So he'll like do something and then he'll end his solo on F, which is like, you know, our home bass note. And he does that like 3 or 4 times, which is this just like really nice, like stair step down kind of technique, I guess, that he's using. So then the saxophone picks up this melody, our Love Supreme theme, and it plays that in all 12 keys. So the rhythm section is not moving through all 12 keys with him. They're kind of staying put, and he's moving that through. So surprisingly, I would think that would not be maybe as effective, and that would be like really dissonant. But because that is so strong in our ear, when it moves it through the other keys, it still sounds right. So I definitely think there's some symbolism there, like all-encompassing, I don't know, moving it through all 12 keys. I think he was definitely like making a statement there. So then after he does that, he comes in, and I believe Elvin Jones does too, chanting now this, but it's a Love Supreme, a Love Supreme. So that's pretty unusual for a jazz album, and very distinct about this piece. So they do that for a bit, and then we're still in that F minor, and then you hear this shift down, and they take it down a whole step to E flat. So then we're on. So we were here, and you hear the shift, and then we're in E flat minor. Now that's interesting because the next piece is in E flat minor. So this is just one of those examples where it feels like this whole thing is a package together, and the end of one is setting up the beginning of two. So then there's a brief bass. I would call it an interlude. I wouldn't even call it a solo. And I really like the way he uses the bass and drums throughout the whole piece. And they never solo like in the piece. They're always kind of like bridging the gap from piece to piece in a way that I think is really nice and more unusual for jazz. All right, now we're going to look at part 2. So part 2 also starts with solo bass. So it's ending on that solo bass, and then we go into part 2 and it starts on solo bass. So it's that keeps that feeling of continuity going on. So this one, I feel like this is probably like the most, part 2 is the most standard of the 4 parts. So we're in more your typical 4/4 swing time. We're not modal, we do have like chord changes. And I think that feel is really nice, because the first one is definitely not like that swing feel. So McCoy is like, Elvin Jones is like all over the place, and he's not really doing the swing thing on the cymbal. And then the bass is very broken up, and it's more rhythmic. And then when we hit this one, it's like those are there, which it's like those very normal jazz processes of like the bass is just walking on the quarter notes, and the way that the ride is playing the swing eights is like super fresh after we've left it. And because the first part wasn't that, it just feels really good hitting part 2, and it's got that feel. So the melody here has this it's this like long descending line. So it actually starts on a high E, and it ends on E. So it's just kind of this like snaky, with some chromaticism in there, this snaky descending thing. And there's a little bit of jumping up and jumping down, but at its simplest form, it's just kind of just like going down the scale. So that's the only like melodic material for the head. So he does that, I can't remember, like 3 times or 4 times. And then he goes, the bridge is essentially just him improvising. So Charlie Parker did this a lot. Ornette Coleman does this a lot, where instead of writing a bridge, you just improvise a bridge. And I think the main point for that is you kind of, the A-B-A pattern is really powerful, where you have a theme and then you do something else. And then when you go back to the theme, it's fresh again. And if you just did A, the theme over and over, it gets a little old. So just the function of leaving the theme to come back is what's going on there. I have less to talk about on this particular track. I do want to mention, so McCoy has the first solo on this one, and it's one of my favorite McCoy solos. It's so good. And how he played with John Coltrane, he had a lot of like albums, under his own name, like a lot of Blue Note titles. And those are good, but I feel like he never played as good when he was with Coltrane. And this solo is one of my favorites. Okay, let's talk about part 3. So we've been kind of like, part 1 was like introduction. Part 2, I feel like is kind of like medium as far as like if we give it a temperature and a speed. And part 3 is emotional, intense, climax. So it really feels like we have this like narrative arc, and part 3 is where things are getting crazy and the most dramatic and drama. So even the beats per minute is 280. So this one is like crazy fast. And it starts on Elvin Jones doing a drum solo, which is just very fitting for the arc and the direction and the feel of the piece. And I mean, obviously he's like one of the best jazz drummers of all time, in my personal opinion. And just the intensity and the feel that he brings is just like, it just totally sets the stage in the best way. So this piece is harmonically is like a blues, but it's you couldn't really at least for me you couldn't really tell. So some of the chords, it's not doing like 1, 4, and 5, but the bones of the blues is there, but he's just using some different chords, which I think is interesting. It gives it that little bit of like familiar feel without feeling so like common or familiar, or like, oh yeah, I know exactly what he's doing. Okay, there's the 4 chord. So on this one, McCoy also solos, and he goes first. And I think that was a really smart choice for him to go first. Normally, it's like whoever is the leader has the first solo. And what that does is him going first is sets the stage for energy advancement, like going up to the next level. So it's like pretty high because it's like fast, and Elvin Jones is going crazy, but it sets the stage for Coltrane to come in, and when he comes in, it like takes it to a whole nother level, and then he just builds from there. So this part is very like very indicative of the music he was about to do all the time, where it's like, it's intense, it's all out, it's crazy, it's emotional, it's energetic. And pretty much everything after this album, that was like the normal feel. So I like that feel. I think it's good. I think in this album it's so much more effective because it's got the contrast and it has this arc, and it builds up to that like crazy emotional place. So again, part 3 is like, if we were thinking of this as a novel, it's like we're in the tension climax zone of this album. So we go back to the head after that, and then it's the drums and the bass, and it's this really weird like letting off steam, like particularly what Elvin Jones is doing. That section, it's kind of like releasing the tension valve in a way, in like Elvin Jones is like doing some stuff, and then he lays out, and then he comes in again. I think it's a really effective way of bringing it down. So then we go into Jimmy Garrison's bass solo. So again, it's using the solos to kind of like stitch everything together and go on this like sonic journey versus just like, okay, your turn, your turn, your turn, tune's done. So yeah, his solo is pretty long. And this is still technically the end of part 3. It feels like it could be the beginning of part 4, but it's still part 3. And I like that this is the only part. I guess it's not the only part, but it feels just like the bass isolated. It feels like vulnerable, and I don't know. It feels like a part of this like emotional journey of communicating what he's saying. This like, you had this like super intense part, and then to go from that straight to the bass is really effective. So then that segues into part 4. So part 4, we go back to the rubato feel. So again, we have this sense of arc because we started part 1 with that rubato, and we started with stagnant harmony or modal harmony, where it's like not really changing. And he comes back to that in the end. So it's like this sense of return, and it's also emotionally very different from the whole album. So it feels like we have gone through this like spiritual, cosmic struggle, and we've gone through that climax, and now we're hitting the resolution, I should say. and it's peaceful, it's serene, it's just very different from the rest of the album. So what Coltrane plays here is actually, he wrote a kind of like a psalm. Let me just pull it out here. So if you have the album and you open it up, right here he has this psalm. I'll just read a little bit of it. I will do all I can to be worthy of thee, O Lord. It all has to do with it. Thank you, God. Peace. There is none other. God is. It is so beautiful. Thank you, God. God is all. So it's kind of this psalm-esque kind of poem that he wrote. And he's actually playing those phrases through his horns. I don't think this was known for a long time. Maybe one of his biographers figured this out. I'm not sure. So if you follow along with those words, what he's playing it lines up almost perfectly. There's only like a couple times where it doesn't line up. So he was like looking at these words and playing the phrases and the syllables of the words, which I think knowing that really adds a lot. The last thing I want to go over is how the piece ends. So it kind of has this flourish, and actually it's one of the few times Coltrane overdubbed himself. So if you listen really closely, there's two saxophones there, and the just like the feel you have when this piece is done is, I don't know, it feels like much similar to me like a classical music experience, just like how epic and I don't know, there's something about just even the closing, like the last 30 seconds of this is just like so great.